got another one.
I'm cool preaching with it. I ain't with my name. I ain't trusting, yeah. That's how my style is.
Well, if we think about the entirety of the master's ministry, the entirety of his ministry, we find that Matthew 17 is in the midst of what I like to think of as the prelude and preparation of the suffering that the master would need to endure. And it's not so much preparation for the master, but preparation for his Talmudim or his disciples. Now, remember, I mentioned previously that they did not quite understand everything yet. And this deficiency in understanding by the disciples is going to continue on right up to and slightly beyond the master's martyrdom. Now, in the last 6-day study, we touched on verses 1 and 2 only with Ach Kepha, but I do want to try to frame up some of these verses for you, utilizing the template that he began with in the previous study. So let us read Ecclesiastes 1, 9 through 11. It says, "The thing that hath been, it is that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done. And there is no new thing under the sun. Is there anything whereof it may be said, See, this is new? It hath been already of old time, which was before us. There is no remembrance of former things, neither shall there be any remembrance of things that are to come with those that shall come after." Now, most of us understand that the majority of the quotes that we see in the Basar or the Gospels are direct quotes that come from the Old Testament. Hence, verse 9. But verse 11, it speaks of a lack of remembrance. And it is laid out in a way that is subtly telling those who shall come after to study and search out things in order to gain that remembrance. This would be you and I. It is telling us to find the patterns or occurrences of old or things done previously. And those instances can be utilized to give us understanding of why things happen and what will be the outcome of these events. The events that are happening around Yahusha and his disciples will allow them to call to mind and remember, one, that these things were foretold, and two, his sayings and how Yahusha handled things. This will become the fuel, the ammunition, the battery in the backs of the disciples needed to propel them forward to do the work in which Yahusha has called them to perform. Now, let's hop over to Matthew 17. The first 13 verses in Matthew 17 has a structure. Verses 1 and 3, we find a record of the event of the transfiguration of the master. In verses 4 through 8, we find Peter or Kepha's suggestion and the divine response. And in verses 9 through 13, we have Yahusha's instruction and the disciples' question. But before we get into that, have you ever had someone tell you that they are not sure that they can believe everything in the Bible? Let's look at Matthew 6:24. It says, "No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve Elohim and Mammon," which means wealth, but it also means confidence. Now, in the sense of what I'm trying to point out, it is not mammon or wealth I'm focusing on, but as I stated, mammon also means confidence. And you should know that confidence is akin to faith. Let's look at Hebrews 11:1. It says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. In this verse, evidence, it is eligos, and it means proof or conviction, but it's also used in the King James Version for the word reproof. And what does the Bible tell us is good for reproof? Well, that we can find and be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is good and acceptable and the perfect will of Elohim. Scripture is good for reproof. Now, here is a practical example of what I'm trying to say. And it's one that I'm sure that all will understand. Now, imagine buying your child a bike and placing the training wheels on it. Your child sees it and says, I can't ride that. Your response would be, you haven't even tried yet. You see, for us, the Bible is that bike. Yah has placed in it all the training wheels that you would ever need. The person who cannot believe is a person who has never attempted to read and do the things contained therein. Reading and doing those things is what brings about understanding, and understanding brings about knowledge and wisdom. And that knowledge and wisdom gain will allow you to progress to riding the bike with confidence and eventually without the training wheels. Do not fashion your understanding after science and worldly knowledge. These will lead you only to additional questions and not truth. But transform yourselves into doing, and this will lead to the renewing of your mind, the understanding that you need and maybe desire, allowing you to truly prove what is good, acceptable, and perfect truth. This is the will of Elohim. Let us get into Matthew 17, and we're going to read verses 1 through 3. It says, and after 6 days, Yahusha taketh Peter or Kepha, James or Jacob, and John or Yehukanan, his brother, and bringeth them up into a high mountain apart, and was transfigured before them. And his face did shine as the sun, and his raiment was white as the light. And behold, there appeared unto them Moshe and Elias talking with them. Now, the Aki pointed out last week, and I read it again today, that there is nothing new under the sun, and that we have seen an event like this before. He pointed out that Moshe, when he returned into the mount to receive the tables anew, returned from that 40-day experience unto the children of Yashar'El, and his face shone. This account can be found in Exodus 34. But there are a few more aspects to these verses that we can investigate and explore. Now, verse 1 says that Yahusha took Kepha, Jacob, and Yehukanan, or Peter, James, and John, up into the high mountain apart. What does this mean? In Mark, the corresponding text says, apart by themselves. And in Luke, it says, he took Peter, John, and James and went up to pray. If we take these three accounts into consideration, we can know that all of the disciples were somewhat in the vicinity when this event took place. Peter, James, and John were taken apart from the other disciples up into the mount, perhaps because they were leaders of the 12. possibly even the elders. This scenario pairs well with what we know from Moshe in his initial ascent into the mount, found in Exodus 24. Let's take a look at Exodus 24, 1. It says, "And he said unto Moshe, Come up unto Yahuwah, thou and Aharon, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders, and worship ye afar off." In verse 9, "Then went up Moshe and Aharon, Nadab, and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Yashar'El." And in verse 14, "And he said unto the elders, Tarry ye here for us until we come again unto you. And behold, Aharon and Hur are with you. If any man have any matters to do, let him come unto them." So we can see that there's a precedence of going up the mount and being accompanied up the mount. Let's hop back over to Matthew 17. An additional point is the timing of the event. Matthew and Mark both mention that this event took place after 6 days. That alone should clue you in to when this event is occurring. But Luke says that it came to pass about in 8 days after the sayings that occurred in the end of chapter 16. To a casual reader, this would appear to be a contradiction. The key to unlock this mystery comes with understanding. I've heard it said before, as it pertains to the 4 Gospels, that if you were to investigate a crime and you had 4 witnesses, if those 4 witnesses had the exact same story with every single detail matching, then you would most likely know that their stories were coordinated and concocted. But if they had the major points roughly close together, with some nuances, depending on each person's views, then you would know that their accounts are truthful. Mark's gospel is widely believed to have been the first account that was penned. He is also believed to have been the young man who fled away naked from the Garden of Gethsemane when Yahusha was apprehended. You can find that in Mark 14, 51 through 52. Now, Mark, he was a Yehudi and an early follower of the way that we see in Acts 12, 12. It says, "And when he had considered the thing, he came to the house of Miriam, the mother of Yehuchanan, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together, praying." Now, the book of Matthew is believed to have borrowed heavily from the book of Mark, and it is believed to have been penned by the disciple Matthew himself, whose real name is Levi. And we can find that if we look at Mark 2, 13 through 14, it says, And he went forth again by the seaside, and all the multitude resorted unto him, and he taught them. And as he passed by, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the receipt of custom, and said unto him, Follow me. And he arose and followed him. Now, Matthew even mentions this encounter himself in his gospel, and you can find that in Matthew 9, 9. It says, "And as Yahusha passed forth from thence, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the receipt of custom, and he saith unto him, Follow me. And he arose and followed him." Now, this is where the Pharisees question Yahusha about eating with sinners, and Yahusha responds that those that are whole need not a physician. Speaking of physician, the Gospel of Luke is believed to have relied heavily on the book of Mark as well. This gospel as well as the book of Acts, is purported and believed to have been written by Luke himself. Luke is believed to have been a physician and a Roman citizen who lived in Philippi, which would make him a Gentile. And his books were written with a Gentile audience in mind. Luke never mentions himself in either of these books, but is believed that in the passages like we find in Acts 20 and 6, Luke is referring to himself. And Acts 26 reads, "And we sailed away from Philippi after the days of unleavened bread, and came unto them to Troas in 5 days, where we abode 7 days." Understanding that Luke is, one, a physician, and two, that he wrote his books for a Gentile audience is the key we need to understand. There's an instruction given for the followers of the way very early on in Torah. Let's look at Genesis 2 and 3. It says, "And Elohim blessed the seventh day and sanctified it, because that in it he rested from all his work which Elohim created and made." We also find something similar in Exodus 20, verses 8 to 10, in the giving of the Ten Commandments. It tells us to remember the Sabbath day, to keep it Kodesh. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of Yahuwah thy Elohim. In it thou shalt not do any work, thou nor thy son, nor thy daughter, thy manservant, nor thy maidservant, nor thy cattle, nor thy stranger that is within thy gates. In Hebraic culture, there is no nomenclature for the days of the week. There is simply first day, second day, third day, on to the sixth day, and then you have the Sabbath. This is not the same for the rest of the world, in which they arbitrarily just count days. Since Luke is writing for a Gentile audience, this is the reason why he reckons the time frame as about 8 days. In actuality, there is no discrepancy in the timing between any of these accounts. Let's hop back over to Matthew 17. The location of this event is also important to note. Throughout Scripture, we see many encounters with Yah that takes place atop mountains. We will find out later on in this chapter, in 22, that Yahusha and the disciples will be abiding in Galilee. Previously, in chapter 16, Yahusha and the disciples were in Caesarea Philippi. And Caesarea Philippi is about 35 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, adjacent with Phoenicia. Now, in Matthew 17, the location is a high mountain. And there is a reason that I am pointing this out to you that hopefully may become evident as we move along. Now, on this mount, Yahusha is transfigured, and Moshe and Elias appear and begin talking to him. The appearance of Moshe and Elias is commonly understood and representative of Yahusha's fulfillment and culmination of the Torah and the prophets. Now, I want to explain this clearly. It is not the conclusion or summation of the Torah and the prophets, but the culmination or the peak, the climax, the high point of the Torah and the prophets. Much like Yahusha mentions in Matthew 5:17, where he says, "Think not that I am come to destroy the law or the prophets. I am not come to destroy, but to fulfill." This word, as we've mentioned many times before, is pleroo, which means to fill up, to completely fill, or accomplish or execute at a high level. Now, we should remember that the transfiguration itself is not happening for Yahusha's sake. It is happening for the sake of those that accompanied him up into the mount, the elder disciples, that will need to relay what they have seen to the others, and for all of them to gain understanding and efforts to continuing the work of the kingdom. Remember, this is occurring on the heels of what was said in Matthew 16:21. It says, "From that time forth began Yahusha to show unto his disciples how that he must go unto Jerusalem and suffer many things of the elders and chief priests and scribes, and be killed and be raised again the third day." And what did we say he shewed unto his disciples? The scriptures. John 5:39. Search the scriptures, for in them ye think ye have eternal life, and they are they which testify of me. Let's continue on in Matthew 17 by reading verses 4-8. It says, "Then answered Kepha and said unto Yahusha, Master, it is good for us to be here. If thou wilt, let us make here 3 tabernacles, one for thee, and one for Moshe, and one for Elias. While he yet spake, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them. And behold, a voice out of the cloud, which said, This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Hear ye him. And when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. And Yahusha came and touched them and said, Arise, and be not afraid. And when they had lifted up their eyes, they saw no man save Yahusha only." Now, I want to point out something here, and it is that seemingly before Kepha could totally finish his thought, the text says that a bright cloud overshadowed them, and the voice of Yah can be heard. And in verse 6, it says that when the disciples heard it, they fell on their face and were sore afraid. Now we can deduce that the esteem or brightness of the cloud prevents the disciples from seeing anything at this point, possibly pretty close to the same luminescent and intensity of light that blinded Shaul or Paul on the road to Damascus. But what is it about our people that makes them sore afraid when they hear the voice of Yah? Make no mistake, sore afraid here, it means vehemently, exceedingly, violently, greatly afraid. I'm imagining loss of breath, extremely elevated heart rate, can't move, can't breathe type of fear. I mentioned in the previous lessons aspects of unwarranted or unjust fear. But here is the thing about fear and why we exhibit it. It's actually pretty simple. is something that we should have picked up on from the beginning of Torah itself. Let's look at Genesis 3, 8 through 10. It says, "And they heard the voice of Yah Elohim walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife hid themselves from the presence of Yahuwah Elohim amongst the trees in the garden. And Yah Elohim called unto Adam and said unto him, Where art thou? And he said, I heard thy voice in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked, and I hid myself." That was not really because Adam was naked that he was fearful. But fear is a trait that we exhibit because we have the knowledge of good and evil. It is our sin nature and the knowledge thereof that activates that fear. For Elohim have not given us, nor Adam, the spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. We actually get a glimpse of how to overcome our sin nature in Genesis chapter 4. In verse 7, he tells Cain, "If thou doest well, shalt thou not be accepted? And if thou doest not well, sin lieth at the door. And unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him." Doest well here. This is the Hebrew word yatab. It is derived from tob, and it means to do well or to do good. And how is it that we do good? By following Yah's word, by following the Torah. Now, Yashar'El, when they left Egypt and arrived at Mount Sinai, they exhibited this same type of fear when they heard the voice of Yah. So much so that they hid themselves far off and asked Moshe for him to speak with Elohim from thenceforth, lest they die. The complete application to the best of our abilities, understanding and following Torah is the only way for us to overcome our sin nature and to be able to not fear. In the case of the disciples in Matthew 17, Yahusha comes and he touches them and he tells them, "Arise and be not afraid." And when they had lifted up their eyes, they saw what? The word / Torah made flesh only. The utterance of Yahuwah in saying that this is his beloved son in whom he is well pleased and that we should hear him, it's also a quotation and a fulfillment of prophecy from the Old Testament. First and foremost, in response to Yashar'El not wanting to hear the voice of Yahuwah in Horeb, we have Deuteronomy 18, verses 18 and 19. It says, "I will raise them up a prophet from among their brethren, like unto thee, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak unto them all that I shall command him. And it shall come to pass that whosoever will not hearken unto my words, which he shall speak in my name, I will require it of him." We also have another passage in Isaiah 42, 1 through 4. It says, "Behold, my servant, whom I uphold, mine elect, in whom my soul delighteth. I have put my ruach upon him. He shall bring forth judgment to the Gentiles. He shall not cry, nor lift up, nor cause his voice to be heard in the street. A bruised reed shall he not break, and the smoking flax shall he not quench. He shall bring forth judgment unto truth. He shall not fail nor be discouraged till he have set judgment in the earth, and the isles shall wait for his law. When I was studying and I read this, something dawned on me. Now, this isn't a part of my message, but in verse 4 here, where it says isles, that can be understood simply as the Gentiles. And what was brought to my remembrance is this. Do you realize that there will be more Gentiles in the kingdom than there are bloodline descendants? What is fascinating about that is it was really meant to be that way from the beginning. Remember, Yashar'El was supposed to be priest to the nations. And Yah told us that he did not choose us because we were more in number than any people, for we were the fewest of all people. This passage from Isaiah is directly quoted in Matthew 12 with a more direct understanding. Let's look at Matthew 12, 20 and 21. It says, a bruised reed shall he not break, and smoking flax shall he not quench, till he send forth judgment unto victory. And in his name shall the Gentiles trust. The problem with some of us is when we see Gentiles and judgment, a lot of times we imagine that judgment to be in lieu of what we think the Gentiles have done. I'm not saying that some Gentiles haven't done things, but judgment simply means to judge. And when you judge, you're either going to judge in favor for or against. So we shouldn't make the mistake of seeing Gentiles in judgment and thinking that it's always going to be a bad thing. But the Gentiles, once they understand and are given the truth, they will cling to Mashiach, probably more so than many of our brethren. Most of our people are quick to be anything other than what they were truly meant to be. We want to be Muslim or Christian or Hindu or etc. Anything but the priest we were meant to be. Let's look at Ezekiel 47, 22 through 22. It says, 22 through 23, it says, and it shall come to pass that ye shall divide it by lot for an inheritance unto you, and to the strangers that sojourn among you, which shall beget children among you. And they, the strangers, shall be unto you as born in the country among the children of Yashar'El. They shall have an inheritance with you among the tribes of Yashar'El. And it shall come to pass that in what tribe the stranger sojourneth, there shall ye give him his inheritance, saith Yah Elohim. Let's also look at Zechariah 8, 23, and it says, thus saith Yahuwah Zabaoth, in those days it shall come to pass that 10 men, plural, shall take hold out of all languages of the nations, plural, even shall take hold of the skirt of him that is a Yahudi, singular. We will go with you, for we have heard that Elohim is with you. In Matthew 17:4, Why does Peter suggest making 3 tabernacles? The whole of this experience of the Transfiguration, it mirrors a lot of the events that occurred in the Exodus account, with Moshe going up the mount to receive the Torah and ultimately coming down with his face shining as well. So much so that because of the people's fear, Moshe would wear a veil when speaking to the people, but he would remove the veil when he went into the tabernacle to speak with Yah. The thing is that many biblical scholars believe that when Moshe comes down the mount the second time with the renewed tables, that the timing of his return is right around the time of the Day of Atonement. And what comes after atonement? Tabernacles. I can tell you personally, it's plausible. Trying to figure out timing when studying the Gospels, it can be challenging as each author is recollecting events that are important to them. A lot of times, these events are not presented in sequential order. I can tell you this, though. In the beginning of Matthew 15, Yahusha's location is Capernaum. And Capernaum is the northern portion of the Sea of Galilee. It's at the northern portion of the Sea of Galilee. At some point, he departs Capernaum for Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon is northwest of the Sea of Galilee, pretty much in Phoenicia. He departs Tyre and Sidon, and he goes to the Decapolis, which is on the southeast shore of the Sea of Galilee. He departs there and goes to Magdala on the western shore of the sea. From there to Bethesda or Bethsaida on the northeast shore of the sea. And from there, he travels 40 miles north to Caesarea Philippi. And this is where Peter acknowledges that he is the son of Elohim. And from there, he goes further north to Mount Hermon, where more than likely the Transfiguration takes place. And from there, they will return to the northern coast, to the Sea of Galilee, and to Capernaum. Now, the book of John, it does not cover the Transfiguration or any of the events I just mentioned at all. Instead, John mentions something in chapter 7 that quite possibly takes place around either Yahusha's return from Tyre and Sidon or Yahusha's return from Mount Hermon. Let's look at John 7, and we're going to begin at 1. It says, after these things, Yahusha walked in Galilee, for he would not walk in Judea. I don't know why they place jury here, but this is simply Judea. So, for he would not walk in Judea because the Yahudim sought to kill him. Now, the Feast of Tabernacles was at hand. It's interesting because in between, it's difficult to see and to understand. But if you look at the Gospels across all of them, all of those events I mentioned, they either happen before verse 1 or they're sandwiched between verses 1 and verse 2. Now, what we see here in John, this is the time when Yahusha sends his disciples to the feast, and he arrives later on in secret. So it is quite possible that just like the account with Moshe witnessing the esteem of Yahuwah on the mount and coming down shortly before Tabernacles, that the Transfiguration event is occurring around the same time frame. Thus, Peter's statement about constructing 3 tabernacles. Perhaps he believed that Moshe and Elias were staying for good. Or perhaps he mentions it here because Tabernacles was nigh at hand. I cannot attest to this 100%, but in my opinion, it is quite plausible. Let's continue in Matthew 17, and we're going to read verses 9 through 13. It says, "And as they came down from the mountain, Yahusha charged them, saying, Tell the vision to no man, until the Son of Man be risen again from the dead. And his disciples asked him, saying, Why then say the scribes that Elias must first come, or Elijah? And Yahusha answered and said unto them, Elijah truly shall first come, and restore all things. But I say unto you that Elijah is already come, or come already, and they knew him not, but have done unto him whatsoever they listed. Likewise shall also the Son of Man suffer of them. Then the disciples understood that he spake unto them of Yehuchanan the Immerser, or John the Baptist. Now, just as we saw in the previous chapter, after the disciples had witnessed these things, Mashiach instructs them to tell no man. But this time he adds, until the Son of Man be risen from the dead, showing us that as Mashiach lived, he had a full understanding that he would indeed lay down his life and be risen again. And why wouldn't he not believe this? For the things he was showing his disciples, the scriptures, they are they which testify of him. Now, many biblical scholars commend the Apostle Paul for his command of the scriptures, as indeed Paul had an extremely good command and understanding of the scriptures. But Mashiach is the scriptures. One of the most common places we can find precept for Mashiach's death, it is Isaiah 53. And most of us are familiar with the passages in Isaiah 53. And if we look at verses 8 and 9, we can see clearly a prophecy of his death. It says he was taken from prison and from judgment. That's a whole message by itself. And who shall declare his generation? For he was cut off, that means he was killed, out of the land of the living. For the transgression of my people was he stricken. And he made his grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, because he had done no violence, neither was any deceit in his mouth. Now, it is in verse 10 we get the prophecy of him being resurrected. It says, Yet it pleased Yahuwah to bruise him. He hath put him to grief, when thou shalt make his soul an offering for sin. He shall see his seed. Can a dead man see? He shall prolong his days. Can a dead man prolong his days? And the pleasure of Yahuwah shall prosper in his hand. Now, another common precept can be found in the Psalms. 16, 8 through 10, it says, I have set I have set Yah always before me, because he is at my right hand. I shall not be moved. Therefore my heart is glad, and my esteem rejoiceth. My flesh also shall rest in hope. For thou wilt not leave my soul in Sheol, or hell, or the grave, neither will thou suffer thine Holy One to see corruption. FYI for your notes, this prophecy here is directly referenced by Peter in Acts 2 and the Apostle Paul in Acts 13. Now, back in Matthew, the disciples go on to ask Yahusha, why do the scribes say that Elijah must first come? In other words, isn't Elijah supposed to precede you? Now, we know that they can identify Yahusha as being the Mashiach, but they themselves, as well as at least the scribes, seem to be having trouble identifying who Elijah is. Yahusha informs them that Elijah has indeed come and that he, the Son of Man, will suffer in like manner as he suffered. And they understood that he was speaking of Yehukanan the Immerser. Now, I know of 3 precepts that mention a messenger or predecessor of Mashiach. The first is again in Isaiah. Let's look at Isaiah 43. It says, the voice of him that crieth in the wilderness, prepare ye the way of Yah, make straight in the desert a highway for our Elohim. Just as I have previously mentioned, this, as well as most of the quotes we find in the New Testament, are direct quotations that come from the Old Testament. This particular prophecy you can find directly referenced in Matthew 3, Mark 1, Luke 3, and John 1. Another precept can be found in Malachi 3:1, where it says, behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And the master whom ye seek shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith Yahuwah Zabaoth. Mark references this precept in chapter 1 of his book. Luke does likewise in chapter 1 of his book. And Mashiach quotes this precept himself in Matthew 11 and in Luke 7. The other precept is in Malachi also, and it's going to be Malachi 4:5. And it says, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of Yah. This is referenced in Mark 9, and the fulfillment of this exact prophecy is told in Luke 1, with the angel of Yah informing Zacharias that even though Elizabeth, his wife, is barren, and they are both well stricken in years, that he will grant them a son, whose name shall be Yehukanan. And he shall turn many of the children of Yashar'El to the master, Elohim, and shall go before him in the Ruach and the power of Elijah. What's interesting, as it pertains to the question that the disciples posed to Yahusha in Matthew 17, is that he had already previously told them exactly who John was. If we look at Matthew 11 through 15, we see this account. It says, verily I say unto you, among them that are born of women, there hath not risen a greater than Yehukanan the Mercer. Notwithstanding, he that is least in the kingdom of Shamaim is greater than he. And from the days of Yehukanan the Immerser until now, the kingdom of Shamaim suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force. For all the prophets and the law prophesied unto Yehukanan. And if ye will receive it, this is Elias, which was for to come. Perhaps it is like I mentioned before. The disciples weren't quite ready yet. Maybe they were still developing their eyes and their ears. There's no shame in that, as myself and many others are still developing the same. The question I have, mainly for the scribes and not so much for the disciples, is this. If they had a true understanding of the scriptures, like they tended to portray, why then could they not make the correlation of the similarities between Yehukanan and Elias? If they had, perhaps this would have had undoubtedly led them to understand Yahusha and who he truly was. I'm just asking. Let me show you a few things, and you can be the judge. Give me a thumbs up if you agree. Now, John, he preached repentance to the people, saying, repent, for the kingdom of Shamayim is at hand. Let's look at 1 Kings 18:21. And Elijah came unto all the people and said, how long halt ye between two opinions? If Yah be Elohim, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. And the people answered him, not a word. Similar or not? John was clothed in camel's hair with a leathern girdle about his loins. Look at 2 Kings 1, 7 and 8. It says, and he said unto him, what manner of man was he which came up to meet you and told you these words? And they answered him, he was an hairy man, and girt with a girdle of leather about his loin. And he said, it is Elijah, the Tishbite. Similar or not? Now, John's meat was locusts and wild honey. 1 Kings 17, 2-6, and it says, and the word of Yahuwah came unto him, saying, get thee hence, and turn thee eastward, and hide thyself by the brook Cherith, that is before Yarden. And it shall be that thou shalt drink of the brook, and I have commanded the ravens to feed thee there. So he went and did according to the word of Yah, for he went and dwelt by the brook Cherith, that is before Yarden. And the ravens brought him bread and flesh in the morning, and bread and flesh in the evening, and he drank of the brook. Similar or not? Shall I continue? John, or Yehukanan, called the Pharisees and Sadducees a brood of vipers who are attempting to flee from the wrath to come. Let's look at 2 Kings 1. I'm going to do 15-16. It says, and the angel of Yah said unto Elijah, go down with him, be not afraid of him. And he arose and went down with him unto the king. And he said unto him, thus saith Yah, for as much as thou hast sent messengers to inquire of Beelzebub, the deity of Ekron, it is not because there is no Elohim in Yashar'El to inquire of this word. Therefore, thou shalt not come down off that bed on which thou art gone up, but shalt surely die. John scolded King Herod by telling him that it was not lawful for him to have Herodias as a wife. Let's look at 1 Kings 18, 17 and 18. It says, and it came to pass when Ahab saw Elijah, that Ahab said unto him, art thou he that troubleth Yashar'El? And he answered, I have not troubled Yashar'El, but thou in thy father's house, and that ye have forsaken the commandments of Yah, and thou hast followed Baalim. Now, John, he also had a death sentence pronounced against him by Herodias. For that, let's look at 1 Kings 19:2. And it says, Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the elves do to me, and more also, if I make not thy life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. Now, both John and Elijah, they experience a moment of doubt and possibly even depression, but are strengthened to endure. Let's read John's account in Matthew 11, 2-6. It says, Now when Yehukanan had heard in the prison the works of Mashiach, he sent 2 of his disciples and said unto him, Art thou he that should come, or do we look for another? Yahusha answered and said unto them, Go and shew John again those things which ye do hear and see. The blind receive their sight, and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, and the poor have the gospel preached to them. And blessed is he whosoever shall not be offended in me. 1 Kings 19, 4-8. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a juniper tree. And he requested for himself that he might die, and said, It is enough. Now, O Yah, take away my life, for I am not better than my fathers. And as he lay and slept under a juniper tree, behold, then an angel touched him and said unto him, Arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was a cake baking on the coals, and a cruse of water at his head. And he did eat and drink, and laid him down again. And the angel of Yah came again the second time, and touched him, and said, Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for thee. And he arose, and did eat and drink, and went in the strength of that meat 40 days and 40 nights unto Horeb, the mount of Elohim. The Transfiguration event, as mentioned by Ach Kepha when he covered verses 1 and 2 of this chapter, was a chance for at least some of the disciples to get a glimpse of Yahusha in his esteemed state. Understanding that the scripture foretold and promised that Mashiach would die and be raised again would have afforded them the motivation that they needed to endure. We have their witness of this event. And if you are a true follower of the way, then you understand that this witness is true. The disciples were able to take these events, Yahusha's words, the scriptures, and go on to walk boldly in them. All of them indeed drank of the cup that he himself drank of, a cup that all of us will be called to eventually drink of. But to what end? Psalms 49, 1-15. It says, Hear this, all ye people, give ear, all ye inhabitants of the world, both low and high, rich and poor together. My mouth speak of wisdom, and the meditation of my heart shall be of understanding. I will incline mine ear to a parable. I will open my dark saying upon the heart. Just so you know, this word is not really dark. It's like a riddle. I will open my riddle upon the heart. Wherefore should I fear in the days of evil, when the iniquity of my heels shall compass me about? They that trust in their wealth and boast themselves in the multitude of their riches, none of them can by any means redeem his brother. nor give to Elohim a ransom for him. For the redemption of their soul is precious, and it ceases forever. That he should still live forever and not see corruption. For he seeth that wise men die. Likewise, the fool and brutish person perish, and leave their wealth to others. Their inward thought is that their houses shall continue forever, and their dwelling places to all generations. They call their lands after their own names. Nevertheless, man being in honor abideth not. He is like the beasts that perish. This their way is their folly, yet their posterity approve their sayings. Selah. Like sheep they are laid in the grave. Death shall feed on them, and the upright shall have dominion over them in the morning. And their beauty shall consume in the grave from their dwelling. But Elohim will redeem my soul from the power of the grave, for he shall receive me. Selah.